South African Airways flight to deliver.
Oh, this is the one, yes.
Did I think I told you?
Yeah.
Where do we stick this in?
And round the back. Can't maybe like Max have it something sensible on the side. Yes, I suppose Etna's a bit of a letdown, really, isn't it?
I was hidden behind Hayes, and one very enthusiastic person was telling me, no, that's not Hayes, that is eruption. The city doesn't generate Hayes, it's all from Etna.
Oh.
Just scroll down.
Oh. So if I just whack that folder across. Inject it properly. Wow. That's amazing. That would liven them up. So you're going back to... Oh, you're off to see your twin brother or something, aren't you?
That's right,
Are you all your family spread around the world?
well, I haven't got such a big family. They're in the UK. And then this twin brother has been around, married around less.
Right.
Yeah, and they lived for a short while in London. She was unhappy.
So you originally...
South Africa, certainly.
Oh, okay. But you've just all decided to go to different places.
Yeah, I'm the only one who stayed in South Africa.
So you don't get to see each other very often then?
Well, my mother's still alive, so they do come out every second year.
Oh, that's good. Oh, gosh. Now? Do you want to start now?
So are you also thinking about the end? Whether you reward the people who turn up on time or the ones who don't?
Well, that's it. I think it might be worth starting, but you're just going to have to go into face up to the fact that some are going to be wandering in, aren't they?
Oh, indeed. But I think that anybody who wants to...
And it's an easy room to get into, this one, without disrupting. Okay, we'll make a start.
I mean, a lot of people here just for their email.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Congratulations for getting up so early this morning. I'm impressed. I hope you haven't got sore heads, but hopefully you enjoyed last night's evening meal at the very splendid palace with all those wonderful painted walls and ceilings. Anyway, this morning's session is on research networking beyond Europe. And we've got three very interesting speakers covering most parts of the globe. Our first speaker is Michael Stanton. We have some technical problems.
I don't know how to put it on full screen. It seems that the reader is not reacting.
I'll carry on introducing Michael whilst we get the technology working. Michael was born in England and completed his PhD in maths at Cambridge University, and since then he's been working in Brazil. And he's Professor of Computer Networking, so I'm surprised he can't operate the technology.
It's not a network.
Anyway, he's going to talk about Red Clara and integrating Latin America into global R&E networking. Michael.
Fine, thank you, Shirley. Good morning, everybody. I managed to pick the short straw and be the first person to talk after last night's gala evening, so welcome to the people who are here on time. I'd like to thank very much the invitation from Terena to be here. The work I'm going to talk about has involved a lot of people over the last 4 years or more, including notably my co-author here, Catherine Sturver from Dante, who is the project manager for the ALICE project, which I'm going to talk about here. I have a rather dense agenda. The last slides refers you to the paper, which is also on the website. It's not quite properly formatted, but it's got all the information in, and rather more than I'm able to present here. I'd like to regard both the paper and the transparencies as a kind of reference material, and so I don't intend to sort of go through it very slowly because there isn't the time, and I hope that some of the information might be useful for reference later on. The structure of the presentation is as shown here. I want to talk a bit about the origins of, about what is Red Clara and about then the origins of academic networking in Latin America. Latin America hasn't interacted much in the past with Europe, but this has improved in recent times. But it's interesting to see how old this practice has been and its ups and downs. And then there's talk about the ALICE project and the creation of Red Clara, which is the main subject here. Then recently formed national research and education networks in Latin America, which is a rather exciting outgrowth of the ALICE project. Something about new networking technologies. This is mainly optical technologies which are being used in some of the NRENs in Latin America, and we're quite pleased with how we're working in this area. And then to finalise, to talk about the benefits of this new networking infrastructure for cooperation between Europe and Latin America in research and education. So I'll start off with introduction to Red Clara. This is a new regional network in Latin America. This interconnects 14 of the 18 targeted countries of the ATLAS program of the European Commission, of the Directorate of Europe Aid, and it has been built with through the ALICE project, which is coordinated by Dante, and in which participate 4 European NRENs from Portugal, Spain, Italy and France, and a large number of initiatives of research and education networking in these countries. There are references to all of these things as I go along. And the objective of the ALICE project is to provide connectivity to Europe, to GEAN, and to enable research and education collaboration between the two regions. These are the countries which are targeted by the ATLAS program. I usually use the 2-letter ISO codes for these countries for saving space. Catherine commented yesterday that it looks like 4 of these countries have died, but that's not quite the case. They haven't been born yet as far as the Red Clara is concerned. We're still working on trying to obtain their connectivity, but we have managed to connect 14 of these countries so far, which is a fairly satisfactory achievement over the time we've been working on this. This is the current topology map. Any resemblance to maps of Giant is purely coincidental, of course. The colours represent the bandwidth, and you'll note that it's not even, and I'll talk a bit about that later. It's not clear, perhaps, the main structure here. We have a ring which connects 5 countries, Mexico in the north, Chile, Argentina, and Brazil in the south, and Panama in the middle. That's the blue ring, and is it blue? I think so. One shade of blue, anyway. And this has a connection to Europe from Brazil, which ends up in Madrid at present. The speed of the ring is 155 meg. The speed to Europe is 622, and the other countries are connected to one of these 5 backbone nodes by spur links between 10 and 45 meg at the moment. The equipment for the network has been provided principally by Cisco with a generous donation. This is a bit about the history of research and education network in Latin America. It's fairly old. I mean, the first connection between Latin America and the global networking started 20 years ago in Mexico and Chile, 2 years later in Brazil, Nicaragua, Uruguay, etc. These were first mainly bitnet connections, but most of them, all of them, became internet connections starting in 1989. And so it would seem that by the mid-90s, then we would have had a fairly good situation as far as research and education networking was concerned in the region. However, there are a number of things which happened during the 90s which caused a lot of these initiatives to stop. And this is mainly the 2 things. One is the ending of monopoly telecommunications in many countries, and the second is the appearance of commercial internet, which is far more important because the commercial providers were able to provide services at lower prices than it was able to do by the individual initiatives. And so many of these initiatives collapsed or became commercial during this period. And in fact, only about 7 of these networks survived until the year 2000. The other thing is infrastructure. These first networks were mainly built using satellite communication. And this has an impact on the topology, principally because the cost of a satellite link is independent of distance and so on. So most of the links actually terminate in the United States. And in fact, the Latin American network as such had its hub in the United States for all this period. Since the end of the 90s, as I say, but there's been a lot of changes in terms of the marketplace. That there has been breaking up of the state monopolies in most countries, in many countries, not all. This has meant competition, lower prices, and also there are transnational operators, some from Europe, from the United States, and from Mexico. Telmex is a very big player in that's the national, well, one of the operators in Mexico, the former telecom monopoly in Mexico, is very active in the region now, buying up other companies, and it's one of the biggest operators in the area. And also, of course, is technology that submarine fiber optic cables from about 2000 reach the region, and there are about three or four different alternatives to get to different places now, which makes for things to improve as far as data networking is concerned. The first means of taking advantage of this was through projects like AMPATH. AMPATH is a project based on Florida International University in the United States, in Miami, and used the global crossing infrastructure for connections to 5 countries in Latin America, 4 countries, sorry, which I mentioned there, Venezuela, Brazil, with 2 connections, Argentina and Chile. And these provided 45 megabit point-to-point connections to Miami with access to internet too. So this was the first stage of this new generation of research and education networks of better bandwidth. Mexico is in a fortunate position in the sense that they have a common border with the United States, so it's much easier for them to get to the advanced networks in that country, and this has continued to be the case. So the situation before the ALICE project was that there were these 5 countries with dedicated international advanced research and education connections, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Mexico and Venezuela, and 3 other existing national NRENs with dedicated connectivity in Costa Rica, Cuba and Uruguay. And all the other initiatives that I mentioned before had ended by this time. In 2002, after the start of the Atlas project, there was financing by IST of a feasibility study called CESAR to look into how one of the Atlas aims, which was to provide this interconnection between Latin America and Europe, could be achieved. And so there was this study carried out by Dante, by the Spanish and Portuguese NRENs, and this was implemented by, amongst other things, a workshop held in Toledo in Spain, to which participants were attended from 12 countries in Latin America to discuss a solution. And as a direct result of this meeting, there were 2 things happened. One was the establishment, the submission the following later that year, I think, of the ALICE project to the Atlas program, and also the creation of a regional networking organization called CLARA. This was loosely based on similar organizations like Terena, specifically for the Latin American countries, and it was incorporated formally in Uruguay the following year, 2003, and it now has 15 members of the 18 countries mentioned earlier. There's a reference there to CLARA. The ALICE project was a result of the CESAR feasibility study, and this was submitted and approved in 2003, and involved, as I said, I mentioned already, the participant countries and NRENs. And this has a budget of 12.5 million euros, with a C contribution of 10 million, and the rest coming from Latin America. And this has been a partnership. The Latin American partners have contributed extensively to design, deployment and operation of the RAID CLARA network and its external links. This is to show some of the difficulties we've had. We started tendering for connectivity in 2003, and there are wide ranges of costs in telecommunications in the region, depending on where you are, it's just a function of the market, basically. This is data which Catherine has accumulated from the tenders which have been conducted by Dante. And so this has unfortunately led to the more or less natural state of having non-homogeneous connections because of the costs, with much lower connections to the high-cost countries. I suppose this is familiar from European past too. The initial connectivity tenders were conducted in 2003, and the first circuits of the new network were activated in September of 2004, which connected Chile, Argentina, Brazil and Spain. By February this year, we include the 14th Latin American country, which is Colombia. This is just about the technical structure. As most of the technical work is done in Latin America by different CLARA bodies, the Technical Forum, which is loosely designed on terrain, as I mentioned, and also a dedicated engineering group and operations group, which have been subcontracted to the NRENs in Brazil and Mexico. There has been some development of connectivity in the last 2 years, apart from to Europe. The National Science Foundation in 2004 launched a program there for International Research Network Interconnections, or Connections, it should be, IRNC. And CLARA, as an organization, participated in 2 of the proposals to link the United States to Latin America, of which one was successful. And this led to the creation of 2 connections from CLARA network nodes in Mexico and Brazil to the United States. And these are best shown on the next map, which shows the 2 connections to the north there, to the US west from Mexico, and to US east from Brazil. These connections are currently the one on the west coast is 2 gig. I'll explain why in a minute. And the one on the east coast is 1.2 gig. As I mentioned, one of the more interesting results of setting up this project was to create new national research and education networks in Latin America, and several of these are mentioned here in Colombia, Ecuador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Panama, Peru, and El Salvador. I have some details on what these are like from Peru, from Ecuador, and from Colombia. In Peru, the network is so far limited only to the capital city, Lima. As you see, we have an external connection which is 10. It's marked here as T3, but in fact it says T3, 45 megabit connection to the Clara backbone node in Santiago, Chile, and connections to the POP, or the NAP as they call it, from other institutions within Lima. It is intended to extend this network as soon as possible to other cities within Peru. This is a list of members. You can get this from the network, also from the paper. The second country mentioned here is Ecuador. Ecuador has a more ambitious project which already involves interconnecting different cities in the country. The connection arrives on the coast at Guayaquil. Most of connections obviously arrive by submarine cable on the coast nowadays, so that's not a surprise. Quito is the capital, and there are connections to other cities. There is a more technical view of the network here, for which I leave for you to study when you have insomnia. But I won't go into that. And there's a list of the institutions, 19 connected by this. So the date of the 2004 of the organizations which were members of SEGIA, which is the name of the network there. We're very excited about the fact that Colombia has become more important in the networking community. Colombia was one of the first countries to install internet in Latin America, but it passed through a long period of severe internal difficulties, and it's only recently that this has been reflected by their networking activities. And the country has, it's a large country, it's fairly populous for Latin American standards, and it has a very well-developed university system. The situation there is that the universities have been organized into regional networks, and there are 6 of these currently working in and around different cities within Colombia. There are 6 cities mentioned on the left side of this transparency, and these have internal connections locally, and they're all connected to the capital, Bogota. The network connection to Red Clara will leave from the coast from Barranquilla, I would think, but it's formally connected to Bogota. For the moment, the connectivity is fairly low, still at 10 megabits a second for national connectivity and international connectivity, but we hope this will improve. I'd like to speak a little bit about some of the new networking technologies, mainly optical, which have been introduced by some of the more traditional Latin American networks, in particular in Chile and Brazil and Mexico, to give a notion of what is the sort of state of the art in this region. In Chile and Brazil, there have been, in this last 4 years or so, setting up of optical testbed networks with support from the national government and collaboration of telcos in those countries. And there's been experimentation with WDM transmission systems and high-speed applications. There are some references here to where more information can be found, although the texts are actually in Spanish and Portuguese only, which may be a difficulty for some. This is a map of the Chilean testbed network, which is about 250 kilometers between the capital Santiago and Valparaiso on the coast. This was operated through approximately a year, interconnecting four sites in these 2 cities. this was intended as to provide experience for the future improvement of the national network, but unfortunately that hasn't been possible to carry out so far. In Brazil, a similar project on a larger scale has been conducted since 2003 in the southeast of the country, which has about a 750 kilometre extension. Again, the fibre is provided free of charge by the telco operators in Brazil, and this interconnects about 20 universities altogether using dark fibre with Brazilian-made WDM equipment, providing a number of lambdas at 2.5 gigs so far, although the intention is to improve this to 10. This is a close-up of the part involved. These are the states of São Paulo on the left and Rio de Janeiro on the right. There are 7 cities involved altogether, and there are about 18 universities or research centres in those 2 states. This project is important because of its scale and the number of people it involves. 2/3 of the budget of about 15 million, 20 million euros. The value changes, of course, because of the exchange rate changes, fluctuations. Is actually dedicated to research and development activities in networking technologies and distributed applications, and involve groups at about 50 different institutions throughout the country in 15 of the 26 states in Brazil. So it is really a very broad-based initiative. As far as production networks are concerned, I've already mentioned the IRNC connection between the United States and Mexico. This, in fact, uses cross-border dark fiber between Tijuana and San Diego. Mexico actually has a second similar connection, the other one to Texas, between Ciudad Juarez and El Paso in Texas. But the one on the west coast is actually shared with Red Clara, and so we see more of that. In Brazil, there are also some optical initiatives which are coming on stream now. One is the new national network, and the other are the metropolitan networks in the cities. This is a diagram of the west coast connection, which is shared by CUDI, and that's the Mexican network, and Red Clara to get to the United States. We have CWDM connection between the Clara POP, Red Clara POP in Tijuana, and San Diego Supercomputing Center in San Diego. This permits a logical interconnection between the 3 collaborating institutions there. So all
Michael,
connections.
5 minutes, please.
Okay. This is the new Brazilian network. It was deployed last November. We have most of the states in Brazil are connected by at least 34 megabits a second. In November, a 2.5 10 gig optical infrastructure was installed. This is using operator-provided waves, which are then administered by RNP, which is the Brazilian network. And this has improved alarmingly the capacity for our network. I think we have an increase of 40 times from the previous network, which we were using until then. The other thing about the Brazilian network is the use of optical networks in the metro area. We have, as I mentioned before, there are 27 points of presence of the Brazilian network. In each of these cities now we're building a dark fiber metro network. This is the case of the city of Belém, which has a 30-kilometer ring in the city connecting 25 points, and there is another extension outside the city. This cable is actually installed by us. This is a 48 fiber ring, and so we're able to dedicate fibers to the individual institutions, some of which use this for internal communications also. So this is an interesting project. It's very important for us, and we have the money from the Ministry of Science and Technology to do similar things in all of the points of presence that RNP has. I'd like to mention a bit about the benefits of Red Clara for European and Latin American collaboration in research and education. One of the motivations of this whole area of collaboration was, of network building, was to make it possible for such collaborations to take place, and this has now resulted in a number of separate initiatives. Obviously, the main beneficiaries are bandwidth-greedy applications, such as high-definition video, and also intensive distributed computing, as in grids. And these are some of the projects which have already been approved or in negotiation for the Framework Programme 6 of IST. Some of these have already started execution. The last one is now in negotiation phase. I have some slides about ELA, which is a sort of extension of the EGEE project in the sense of the technology is being applied to collaboration between Latin America and Europe. And the objective of this is to build a pilot e-infrastructure in Latin America based on this technology. Currently, this involves these countries and these institutions. CLARA, as you note, is one of the organizations involved here, called International Organization. People ask, what has Uruguay got? And Uruguay's got the office of CLARA, that's about all, as far as this project's concerned. But behind CLARA, there's RNP and REONA and other Latin American networks which are providing the infrastructure for this. This is what ELA hopes to achieve by next year, to institute a grid network which will reach all these institutions. As you see, they're scattered in, I think, 3 European countries, Portugal, Spain, and Italy, and CERN, and in 7 Latin American countries. Finally, I'd like to summarize the achievements of Red Clara are firstly to maintain internal Latin American traffic now within Latin America for the first time. Beforehand, as I said, the Latin American hub was in the United States. This has now meant better service and improved collaboration within the region. And it also facilitates collaboration within between Europeans and Latin Americans. So there are more than 700 universities in Latin America and 3,500 in the European Union. So there is a lot of opportunity for collaboration there. And there's also much interest because there are some unique sites for scientific research in the areas I mentioned there, in geology, geophysics, astrophysics, climate, oceanography, biodiversity, environmental and human cultures, of which Latin America has a number of interesting cases. The final point is about this has been the result of 4 years of intensive activity involving the institutions mentioned to set up Red Clara and to make it possible for all this kind of activity to continue. But there is a question about the sustainability of this activity. For the moment, the European Union has been providing 80% of the finance for the maintenance of, for the setting up and the operation of the network. And some of these new NRENs that I described have only recently connected, say in the last 6-9 months, to the Red Clara network. However, the ALICE project currently is expected to terminate in March next year. And we don't think it likely that this activity can be maintained purely with Latin American financing. It is necessary to have external money to keep this going, at least until we can get a good business situation for the Latin American partners. And so this subject has been discussed extensively ever since the project started, and has recently been taken to the highest political level. Last week there was the European, Latin American and Caribbean Summit of Heads and States and Heads of Government in Vienna, and the subject was on the declaration from that project. We don't have specifically mention of a successor to ALICE, but you'll note in the red letters there some of the items in the draft declaration from the summit specifically mention collaboration in ICTs between the two regions, and also to enhance interconnection between Red Clara and Géant. And so I'd like to close there. Thank you very much for your attention. As you say, if you need more information, the draft article, which is available on the Terrena site, on the TNC site, has information, further information, and also references. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. We've time for one question. No? Yes, Duncan.
Michael, it's actually it's going to be one questionnaire, but two questions. The first is just a word or two about whether so-called commodity internet access is provided using the Red Clara infrastructure, including the 622 meg link across to Géant.
No.
And the answer is no.
No.
Each institution looks after itself with regard to commodity.
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
The new NRENs were working with commodity internet before.
Yes.
And,
you said,
the existing NRENs have a provision. It depends on the country. In Brazil, for instance, RNP provides commodity internet access for all its clients, but we don't run this traffic over the Clara connection.
Thank you. And the second is also just a word or two about the extent to which this whole enterprise has been driven top-down by the governments of the countries in Latin America versus bottom-up by the universities and the NRENs as associations of universities.
We've had to drag the governments along with us. The governments have not...
So the leadership has come from below?
From the networks,
yes.
From the institutions which organise the activities in this area. The governments have not had taken many initiatives at all.
Okay.
Except in the sense that, for instance, in Brazil, we have a nice situation that the government does support RNP, but they don't determine our international policies. I mean, we have to tell them what we should be doing.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Michael.
Pleasure.
We'd now like to move across to our new speaker, who's actually standing ready to come to the plinth. He's Duncan Martin. He's the CEO of the Tertiary Education Network of South Africa, and that short name is TNC2006. And he's going to tell us about the emerging NRENs of Sub-Sahara Africa. If you just go...
Probably going to be more efficient for somebody to save me the need to explore here. Should we show those photos first?
Oh, you can do if you want.
We need the desktop too. Yeah. I'm going to show you, not as part of my presentation, 5 quite dramatic photos of Kilimanjaro. Our proximity to Etna might mean that you would be interested in. And how do we make them full screen? These photos are taken by the crew of a South African Airways Boeing on a flight which I was flying from Nairobi to Johannesburg. The captain, I should be wearing a speaker.
No, if you need to speak to that.
Full screen?
I'm
The
a
captain,
Mac
as we were taxiing out from Nairobi, said he had a treat for us, that on the inbound flight from Johannesburg they had seen the mountains sticking out above the clouds, and they'd shown the passengers, but he wanted to go back and take some pictures, and we did just that. This peak is 19,000 feet, so we climbed to about 21,000 feet, and he did a sort of drop the right wing, and we all went over to the right-hand side, and we had a stately fly past. But I was quite stunned to see what the top of this mountain actually looked like. Black eye in the middle was really quite something. Okay, we can just cycle through the pictures. Yeah, that's approaching. Just next one. Will show me what to do? Just click on there. Okay. I think that's a stunning picture. From the aircraft, one could actually see the footpath by which about 10% of those who set out from the bottom actually make it to the top. Right, I think that's it. Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to thank Terena for the invitation to come and talk about Sub-Saharan African affairs. And the original invitation was to talk about South African networking, but I'm actually a member of the UbuntuNet Alliance, which I'll describe as part of this talk, and so decided to be forward enough to speak as a representative of sub-Saharan Africa, actually more the eastern and southern regions of sub-Saharan Africa. Professor Bjorn Persson of the Royal Technical Institute in Stockholm, and who has had a lifelong passion. He's a professor of telecommunications engineering, and he's had a lifelong passion for telecommunications in Africa, especially in East Africa. Many PhD students from the region. And he gave a presentation at a conference that was arranged by the African Association of Universities as one of the conferences attached to the World Summit on Information Society in Tunis in November last year. And he made this statement. He's a sort of father figure in this movement for us. And he made the statement that no later than 2008, the universities of Africa would like to have connectivity that matches that of their counterparts in other parts of the world. But do we know what the target looks like? My next few slides are some press releases that we've seen. This is the Xi'an 2 press release of June 2005, and so we can see that. We see the sort of bandwidths and the sort of advanced networking technologies that are being explored. We would like to see some of that. This is the TNC2006 press announcement. This is a wonderful project. It's a Dante-led project and is going to link the 10 countries at 622 megabits per second. Internet 2 announcing an Abilene replacement over the next 18 months. Each institution to have 2 lambdas, one for normal IP traffic and one to do with as it wishes. World land speed record. There you can see in the map the path that was taken. It's a round trip, different inbound and outbound paths from Tokyo, University of Tokyo, led by a professor at the University of Tokyo, and going through numbers of points and achieving what you could expect out of a 10 gigabit per second, 32,000 kilometer path, 8.8 gigabits per second. In the opinion of the leader, Dr. Hiraki, there probably won't be another attempt because you can't really do much better than that on a 10 gigabit per second network. So there won't be another attempt until there's more than 10 gigabits per second. I remember my first involvement about 3 years ago with the European Commission at a meeting in Brussels. A world land speed record of about 1/10 of the speed was announced. So we do see the target, and we like what we see, and we want to participate in this. I come now to developments which have really lie underneath, have enabled the burst of activity over the last year or so in sub-Saharan Africa. Optical fiber has been deployed. NRINs are emerging rapidly as vehicles to exploit this, and the UbuntuNet Alliance has been formed as a bottom-up, universities-driven alliance of NRINs in Eastern and Southern Africa to try to manage the sensible sharing of resources and cost. So optical fiber has been deployed by national operators, cellular operators, electrical power companies. In fact, more kilometers of optical fiber in Eastern Africa are owned by electric power companies than by the telcos of the region. And then consortia of the above also putting in fiber. There are private enterprises. I know of one that has bought the rights of way from a Chinese-funded railway line from the western parts of Zambia through to Dar es Salaam. They bought the rights of way to lay fiber down that railway line, and are still looking for the funding to actually do it. What's driving the fiber deployment? It's the amazing take-up of mobile telephony in Africa. That is driving it to a considerable extent. The mobile operators are almost larger, some of them now, than the incumbent fixed line operators. Deployment of fiber by power companies, as I mentioned, and in some, but not all countries, many countries, but not all, the removal of restrictive regulations. That is true especially in East Africa. Unfortunately, it's not true in my own country. And so it is still the case that there are few countries that have both an enabling regulatory environment and capital to exploit that. South Africa does perhaps have the capital, but doesn't have the enabling regulatory environment yet. And then the very exciting prospect that some of you may know of the EASY cable, the East Africa Submarine System. This is a proposal that's been around for about 3 years now. It comes from a consortium, well, a club really, an informal consortium of operators of the area, of the region, and they propose to build a cable that would run from Durban. In fact, I think I have the red in the east off the east coast. That is the proposed route for the EASY cable. It runs from Mtunzini, which is just north of Durban in South Africa, landing points at Maputo, Dar es Salaam, Mombasa, Mogadishu in Somalia, around the Horn of Africa to Djibouti, and terminating in Port Sudan. At Port Sudan, it can connect to fibers like the CME-WE family of cables that Dante uses, for example, as part of the TAIN-2 project. Within Africa, you can see the dry part as opposed to the wet part of the proposal. So the easy concept includes building out the backhaul into the countries, especially landlocked countries like Uganda, Rwanda, which cannot connect other than through transit services from countries on the way to the sea. The EASY cable is the subject of huge debate. NEPAD, that's the New Africa Partnership for Development. It's an association of governments of Africa. They are pushing, governments themselves are pushing, civil society organizations, including the NRENs of Africa, donors from Europe and from North America, the World Bank, all want EASY to be an engine of economic growth and want to make sure that it is not another economic disaster like the West Coast cable, the so-called SAT-3 cable. SAT stands for South Atlantic Telecommunications, not satellite. So there is a cable running down the west coast of Africa. It is owned by a club of operators. The club chose, in its wisdom, to give each national operator of the countries that have a landing point, including my own, 5 years of exclusive landing rights. So we've literally had a monopoly, private monopoly-owned cable. The prices are sky high. Developmental impact has been negligible. In a country like Nigeria, for example, NITEL, their telco is a member, is a consortium, but has sold very little bandwidth. It continues to be cheaper to use VSAT connections. In South Africa, Telkom South Africa has a very extensive fiber network within the country. It is widely used, and everybody just gulps and pays, but the traffic is indeed carried by the SAT-3 cable. So, returning to the slide, there is a vast determination on the part of of governments and consumers that should not happen with the EASY cable. And there's a kind of war going on. NEPAD, this intergovernmental body, has taken the lead in proposing an alternative ownership model to this club of shareholders with a secret agreement between them. And they have proposed things. Some of it looks quite academic. There are no models or no cases in practice where the model they propose has been applied and is a commercial success. And in the bottom there you can see what's happening. As of today, they are honing the models. Regulators are trying to work out what regulations might be used to impose the model. And there's a meeting at the end of May. It's actually now moved into June of the ministers of the countries involved. Meanwhile, on the beaches, the operators that formed the consortium and have the intention, they own this project to build EASY, they plan to continue. They threaten to drop the entire project if governments don't get off the back. They don't have enough money to proceed, and the World Bank is withholding money unless they give some sort of open access model. It's not quite as dramatically bad as if you look at the bottom bullet, the SAT-3 partners. There is the EASY partners do not propose to give themselves any exclusivity. In my view, that is what did the damage on the West Coast with the West Coast cable, more than the club model of ownership. It's the absence of competition within each country at each landing point. And with the EASY proposal, there are already several operators at most of the landing points. So it remains to see what's going to happen. about 2 weeks ago, Kenya, the Kenyan government announced that it had got tired of waiting for this war to be resolved and it was going to build its own cable. So that's shaking up things a bit. So much for fibre. I come now to the second driver, and that is the formation of NRENs. We are taking very much the European NRENs as the prototypes, and that's 5 yellow bullets there, show how we see the NRENs, national character, and the inclusivity, open to all universities and research institutions, including private ones. Some caveats about profit-seeking participants, but apart from that, trying to be a unique resource open to all accredited players, as it were. It serves to interconnect member institutions, to connect to GÉANT, and through transit services from GÉANT and other connections to the research and education networks worldwide, and to promote advanced networking. In Africa, this comes to the question I asked Michael, NRENs also act as bandwidth consortia and secure general or commodity internet access as well. That's because of cost. The long-haul cost to reach Europe, to reach the US of A, is paid entirely by the African participants. So when a well-funded research project at the New York University, for example, browses an oceanography or an astronomical website in Africa, they are doing so courtesy of payments by the Africans. That's just how the internet grew. Johnny come lately as Johnny pays. These three on the right, Kenet, Maliko, and Tenet, these are the 3 operating NRENs at the moment. Tenet is the one of which I'm the CEO. That's the longest existing and is fully functional. We have about 40 institutions with 100 sites, including satellite campuses between them, 100 sites where we deliver services. Maliko is just starting. It's actually a library consortium. The librarians took the initiative in Malawi, and as a spin-off from Maliko, there will come about MAREN, which will be the Malawian NREN. And then Kenet, Kenya Education Network, is fully functioning, has been doing so for about 2 years. And its founder is Victor Charlo. He is one of the board members of the UbuntuNet Alliance. So I come now to the UbuntuNet Alliance. This is a bottom-up organization that came about essentially through initiatives by that Professor Bjorn Pearson I mentioned, but it happened rather easily. It's a group of people representing NRENs that exist, the 3 I've just shown you, and others, and also representing people that are starting projects in their countries to create NRENs, and with the intention of becoming the GÉANT of Africa, if that's not too presumptuous. There's nothing exists yet. It is registering. Within a week or 2 will be registered as a non-profit association in Amsterdam. That will enable it to conduct business operations, receive donations, own assets, and in particular attempt to become a member of that EASY consortium. This is a key strategy, but it's not what we're about. But we are looking to buy our way into the EASY consortium, so as a key means of providing sustainable, cheap bandwidth for the long-haul connection to Europe. At the bottom you can see the founding NRENs. It is Kenet, MAREN, that's Malawi, Mozambique, MORNET. The leader there is Americo Muchanga, and he's a PhD student of Professor Bjorn Pearson that I mentioned. RedNet in Rwanda, and Tenet. This alliance was announced at the November WSIS, World Summit on Information Society, and it has strong support from the AAU, that's the African Association of Universities, and SARUA is the Southern African Regional Universities Association. Both of these are non-governmental, bottom-up associations of universities in the regions they represent. We've enjoyed very strong encouragement and support from the European Commission. There was a planning workshop held in Brussels earlier this year, and we're hopeful that an EC-sponsored feasibility study will commence soon. I mentioned a moment ago that we are trying to join the EASY consortium. There was a NEPAD workshop at which the parties, governments, and NEPAD on the one hand, the operators on the other hand, and in the presence of representatives of civil society, including myself, debated things, but it didn't really close the gap. And as I showed you in that Back on the Beaches slide, there is no clarity yet as to how it's going to happen and whether or not the easy cable will be an open access one or not. The bottom bullet there mentions IDRC of Canada, Swedish International Development Agency, CIDA, the Open Society Institute, and the Open Society Institute of Southern Africa. These are donors that are supporting the UbuntuNet Alliance in its opening, to get going and in its opening months. This is sort of the international connectivity that we envisage, using the West Coast cable, that WASC stands for West Africa Submarine Cable, SAFE, the South Africa Far East Cable. These exist and are in use, and we want to use them to reach the red dots that you see outside of Africa. In the SAFE cable goes to Penang in Malaysia, and we would like to a short haul from there to Singapore, where TAIN 2 has a major pop. In London or Amsterdam, we would like to peer with Géant, and then over in New York City with North American, and hence to South American and other. So we will rely heavily on transit services from these major regional RENs of Europe and America. When it comes to the UbuntuNet backbone, then unlike Europe, Africa does not have a homogeneous regulatory regime. The European Commission is far more advanced in that sense than the African Union. And so we foresee that there will be something of a patchwork regional backbone in which the NRENs themselves are the parties that are licensed to carry and receive international traffic across boundaries. And the UbuntuNet Alliance will have to have contracts with each NREN in order to deploy a backbone and run POPs of any sort. It's going to be a nightmare to some extent, an interesting nightmare to cope with all the different regulatory regimes, and also to batter down the very common practice of the incumbent telcos of charging enormous prices for the half circuits that run to countries' boundaries. They do it as a way of keeping each other out of each other's backyards, as it were, so prevent competition. As an example, the University of Swaziland uses Tenet's services, but pays about between 2.5 and 3 times what a South African university pays. That extra 1.5 times the cost comes from the half circuits charged by the Swazi's own telco and by South African Telecom to connect from Swaziland into South Africa. And I've arranged a meeting with vice-chancellors and senior people in both telecoms. They are just not interested. Those telecoms are just not interested in reducing these half-circuit prices. It opens too much of a gap. So this diagram suggests how we would like to work. The big green blob at the bottom is the UbuntuNet patchwork. That's why I've shown it as a big green blob encompassing the red blobs, which are the NRENs of Africa. And you can see the sort of backbone, which is really the patchwork backbone I mentioned earlier. The blue arrows, if you can see them, the dark blue against the rather darkish blue background, connecting into the general internet and the global REN and Géant and the global REN. Those circuits, those dotted dark blues, will have to carry both commodity traffic and the REN traffic, research traffic, simply because they are going to be very, very expensive. We can't afford to have separate dedicated circuits for research traffic. They're going to be very expensive, and so as the black arrows at the top indicate, in Europe, in North America, in Singapore, we will break out into both the REN and the general commodity network. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Any questions for Duncan? No? Yes. You wait for the microphone.
Just, Duncan, just one question for interest. These operators that you are talking about in South Africa or Swaziland, are they national monopolists dependent on some Ministry of Telecommunications, or are they actually commercial organizations with a monopoly status?
Yes and yes. In the case of Swaziland, it is a national operator, monopoly. With a sort of pleased grin on their faces, they'll tell you they're also the regulator. Yeah. In the case of South Africa, Telkom South Africa was privatized about 7 years ago. The assets were sold. The government of the day got a nice revenue and still has 38% shareholding. And the other shareholders are quite widely spread. Some are foreign. The public of South Africa, I think, has 10% of the shares. So we're dealing there with a private monopoly. We're 7 years down the track, and we still do not have a second network operator. One has been created through legislation, and the shares have been sold. The controlling shareholder, I don't think you'd ever guess who it is, but I'm not displeased with the answer. The controlling shareholder is Tata Communications of India. So while being unwilling to allow South African companies to lay their own infrastructure, we are willing to sell the crown jewels to foreign companies to run the second competitor. So I don't see much point. No one expects a duopoly to have much impact on consumer prices. And I think we're a long, long way still from having the kind of open telecommunications regime that you enjoy and take for granted here.
Then I just have one more question in association with that. In your dealings with the European Commission, will the European Commission follow the model of the Atlas program, where there's also a horizontal action where regulators between Europe and Latin America operate and, well, not operate, but communicate and exchange best practices and try to form an alliance? Or is the money that might be given by the European Commission for any sort of network going to be isolated only for infrastructure with no regulatory framework or other sort of initiative around it?
Well, I'm sure you saw me grinning at David West, who is the next speaker. Yes, I think I'll hold that question for him and he can wriggle on the end of that hook. Thank you. I don't know.
Any more questions for Duncan? There's one at the back there, please. Can you wait for the microphone, please?
Thank you. There are several countries in sub-Saharan Africa that are missing from UbuntuNet. Do you have any news concerning Angola, Zimbabwe, Botswana?
Yeah, thank you for that question. The UbuntuNet Alliance still has to be incorporated and have its first board. So those 5 countries and the 5 individuals, of whom I'm one, we represent the interim board, and our job is to get the UbuntuNet Alliance created formally. And then the first proper board, as elected by the members, will take such decisions. But I can tell you what we think. We want the alliance to be open to all NRENs of the region that apply, all real NRENs, real in the sense of meeting the conditions that I had on the bullet point there, that they themselves are open to all universities and so on. So an acceptable use policy would be the definition of an acceptable NREN. We want it to be open. Secondly, we want it to be the list. We have the notion of a membership region, which is a list of countries. We are avoiding defining that list of countries by using existing political groupings like the Southern African Development Community or any existing political groupings. Our membership region is just a list of countries. It will be adjusted by the board according to the fibre reachability. So if a country's NREN can sensibly connect to the UbuntuNet backbone, then we're going to be delighted to have them. We're not going to get into the business of provisioning VSATs. So with regard to Angola, they'll be welcome if that condition applies. We still don't know whether the West Coast cable, to which Angola has a connection, whether that will be an asset that is usable by the UbuntuNet Alliance. If so, then from day one, Angola NREN would be welcome to join.
Okay. Thank you very much, Duncan. I'd like to move on to our final speaker in this session. He's David West from Dante, and he's been project manager for EU Med Connect since it started, and he's also been involved in the Asian regional networking. And he's going to talk to us about the progress made to connect Europe with research and education communities in other world regions. So, David.
Success. Right, good morning everyone. I'm conscious I'm the third and last speaker in this session. There's some nice warm sunshine outside. There's some nice strong coffee outside, which also may be very attractive to you. So I will try to make this not too long, hopefully fairly interesting, and I hope you will have learned something about Dante's experiences of developing regional networks by the end of this talk. I'm going to talk a bit about the physical networks, but I'd also like to talk about the use that's been made of the networks and also some of our experiences in developing the projects. I think first it's quite interesting just to wind back a mere 3 years and look at what regional connections did Europe have with the rest of the world then. And the answer was hardly any. The only connections we had were with 3 of the networks in North America and one of the major networks in Japan. So networks with the developing countries. Apart from that, there were no connections to any parts of the emerging world. Oh, thank you very much. No connections to any parts of the emerging world. There were some additional transit routes via Abilene network in the States, for which we were very grateful. But apart from those connections, any connectivity that anyone in Europe needed with the rest of the world went through the commercial internet. And that's quite amazing that that is only 3 years ago. Roll on to now, and by my calculation, totting it up when I was trying to put these slides together, I believe we have connections with 48 networks around the world. So from 4 to 48 in 3 years, I think is quite some going. It's quite interesting that this has been done in quite a concerted way. A lot of it has been done thanks to the funding and support from the European Commission, which has helped do this. It's interesting that although there have been some individual cases of individual networks connecting to GÉANT, and Duncan's TENET is the case in point, connecting South Africa to Europe. In most cases, what we've done is we've actually tried to tackle these this time on a regional basis. So rather than individual networks trying to connect to Europe at high cost, I know that's the case in Duncan's case, what we've tried to do is get economies of scale. We've actually, and rather also have the network come to Europe, which again is what Duncan's had to do, we've actually tried to go out and help the networks connect to each other and help fund the connections to Europe. I want to talk about mainly about the Dante projects, UMed Connect, Alice a little bit, although you've already heard a lot of the detail about that, and also about TANE2. And I also want to talk, as I said, about our experiences. I would also like to just at this point mention the fact that there are other regional projects which have been successfully undertaken. They were mentioned on the previous slide. The CERN2 project led by GRNet, and also the Central Asian projects currently under the name of Occasion, which has linked the Caucasus together as well. So firstly, UMed Connect. This was the first of the regional projects that Dante tackled. I was involved in it from the start. There were no precedents at that time, and it proved to be a fairly tough project for a number of reasons. I have a few scars as a result of that. Most of them have healed. There's a few left. Finally, after the various wounds and scars, we did manage to create a network which started to be deployed in 2004, which connects most of the North African countries and some of the countries in the Middle East to each other and to Europe. 7 countries have been connected for the first time via this program. Morocco, working along the northern African coast, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, and then into the Middle East, Palestine, Jordan and Syria. Some other countries in the region are also connected indirectly via their géant links. And you'll notice with this network, a bit different to the Alice one, it's very tightly bound into Europe. That's partly because it's convenient to do so because it's in the same time zones, physical distances are not too great. It's also the fact it was an absolute necessity because there's hardly any connectivity right now between the African and the Middle Eastern countries themselves. So most of the links have to go via Europe in order to create the network. Also tightly bound to Europe in the sense that it's sharing the same NOC that we use for the géant program. It's also interesting that for us in Europe, it's quite easy in this era when we airily talk about light paths and wavelengths and 10 gigs and all these very impressive speeds. It's also quite easy to forget what it feels like to be on the wrong side of the digital divide and how even quite small things can actually make huge differences to the researchers. Just take a look at this quote. This was a quote from one of the evaluators of one of our programs soon after the connection to Tunisia was opened up. And you can see that everyone stayed behind because there was 1 meg of connectivity back to Europe to play with. That is, to me, I think that's a great quote, and it shows how far they've come and how far they still have to go in order to bridge the digital divide. But more broadly, I think the UMed Connect program has done some quite amazing things. 11 Mediterranean countries now are connected, 7 of them directly, 4 via géant. Nearly 200 universities are connected for the first time, over 1 million users, and a lot of projects are now starting. It's been quite a slow business in the Mediterranean to get things to happen. There were some application projects also funded by the Commission, which started up and which are now using the program. The Strabon one is interesting because, sorry, the Med Forest one I should say is interesting because having started with a hub for their network in Paris, they were able to move it to Rabat because the UMed network had allowed that. And so for the first time, some of these projects are able to put their data centers into the Mediterranean region. The other significant project that is now using UMed Connect is the UMed Grid project. I'm going to take a slight detour here for a couple of slides just to mention the UMed Grid project. It only started at the beginning of this year. It's got 14 partners, and like other grid projects, it's doing the same sort of thing as other grid projects, but for the first time in the Mediterranean. So it's using the EGEE procedures and infrastructure. It's using géant 2 within Europe, and purpose for mentioning it here, it's using UMed Connect for the connectivity for the Mediterranean region. And indeed, it could not function in the Mediterranean region without UMed Connect. As well as all the partners which are on the left-hand side, there's a whole lot of third parties also involved, other countries and other universities. Still getting going, but already starting to develop some interesting applications. I'm not going to even begin to try and explain this to you because I'm not sure I could, but what this is doing is it's modelling groundwater and water purity in Tunisia. I think that's all I can usefully say about it. Please no questions on this slide. Back to UMed Connect. On the left-hand side slide, we're looking at 4 of the countries that are connected for the first time to UMed Connect. The little box in blue each time is how much connectivity, international connectivity they had in 2002 before UMed Connect. On the right-hand side, the big purple blobs are how much connectivity they have in 2005 after UMed Connect. And as you can see, Algeria, Egypt, Morocco and Tunisia all have a lot more international connectivity now thanks to UMed Connect. And the right-hand side is saying much the same thing, showing how much of their international connectivity is directly provided by UMed Connect. Again, in most cases, it's a lot, or most of it. So as far as the next stage for UMed Connect is concerned, the project originally was going to end this June. It's been extended for another year so far, and we are now looking to see how to keep the program going into the long-term future. We have a program loosely called UMed Connect 2, which, surprise, surprise, is hoped to be a replacement network, which we hope will follow on seamlessly from it. And that is very much a work in progress at the moment. Alice, well, you've heard a very comprehensive description of Alice itself. I've got one or two slides with some of the words which say the same as you've heard already, so I'm not going to use the words. I'm just going to make a few comments about the slides as we go through. First of all, you've seen the topology slide for the Red Clara network. This is compared to UMed Connect, this is an autonomous network, whereas UMed Connect is very closely linked, as I said before, to GEONT2. This is very much its own network and managed highly autonomously and independently, and very well, I believe, as well. Here's a nice quote from the director of the Guatemalan network. I'll leave you to read that. A dream come true. Very nice. You've already heard some of the words there. I'll just make a couple of comments about Alice. One of the successful things I think that Alice has done is that it has formed its own consortium and its own governance structure and organisational structure. It's the only one of the Dante projects that has so far done that. And I think that is a measure of its maturity and success in many ways, but that has already happened. It's also been very proactive in generating applications to use the network as well. So certainly a highly successful project, and one that we, again, are very much sort of still supporting to actually make sure that it does continue into the long term. TANE2, the most recent project that we've been involved in. This is our project for the Southeast Asian region. You've already seen the topology map. This network has been deployed since January of this year. The last 2 links are just going in now. All other links are functioning well. You'll note it has a ring that connects Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and China together. I didn't say them in the right order, but those are the 4 links that cause the link. They then have 2 high-capacity links back to Europe, a southern link from Singapore that uses the CMUE 3 cable, and a northern link from Beijing, which is, interestingly, for the first time using the Siberian cables, high-speed cables there, which come over to GEONT2 in Copenhagen. We have 10 project partners in Asia for this program. And one of the interesting things, I think, here, another similarity with Alice, and one of the successes, I think, that Alice has had, and one of the successes we're having with TANE2 is the fact that amongst the partners in the region, there are some quite big, advanced and well-resourced and experienced NRENs. So while some of the partners here are small and emerging, others are already well established and are able to therefore contribute their own expertise and indeed in some cases finance or contributions in kind to the programme. And in Europe, France, Netherlands and UK, NRENs are giving us a lot of support. I said I'd talk about applications. This is an example of one of the applications using the TANE2 infrastructure today. It's a bit hard to tell what's going on in that slide, but there's telesurgery involved. You probably don't want to look too closely because it could get gory. But basically, what the students are doing there is observing some surgery on the stomach that is being done. The purpose of having it, and the reason why it needs to use a high-capacity network is that whilst the surgery is being done in one location, it is being reviewed by expert surgeons in another location who are using the high-definition images to actually see exactly what is going on and to comment on the surgery whilst it's taking place live. They're not doing remote surgery, I hasten to add, although that is being talked about as a future application, although I shan't be putting my name down as one of the guinea pigs for that, I suspect. So that's one application that's already using the TNC2 network. Quite a few others are being readied to use it right now. Disaster warning systems, which are clearly highly relevant for the region, are one of the areas. There's quite a lot of work on oceanography involved, and climatology also. And also there's already a distance learning application between Cambodia and France, which has been up running for a while, and is now starting to use the TNC2 network as part of the connection path between France and Cambodia. What we're seeing, of course, with the TNC2 network is not only much higher capacities for the researchers in the region, but also much shorter latency between Asia and Europe, as for the first time we're getting direct connections rather than going all around the other side of the world via the States. This is a little map, one of the weather maps from the TNC2 NOC. It, like Alice, it has a purpose-built NOC, which in this case is based in Hong Kong. That was tendered and run by, has been awarded to Tsinghua University, who run the CERNET NOC in China, although for this purpose they established a new centre, as I said, in Hong Kong. And the lines are showing the traffic flowing over the TNC2 network today. Again, sustainability. This project lasts until the end of next year. We are already, of course, therefore having to plan for what follows. Again, it's a familiar theme, this, with all the regional projects, that not only you have to get them going, you then have to spend just as much time worrying about how to keep them going afterwards. And again, we're going through the same sort of program of trying to make sure that there's not a break period, which clearly would be disastrous for researchers in the middle of their experiments. We also will try and get a much longer operational period this time, keep focus on applications, maybe extend the geographical coverage if money allows. There's a lot of other countries in Asia who are now clamouring to join this programme, having to hold them back at the moment. And also, we also believe that, just like with the Alice experience, we want to transition the programme into Asia, away from Dante, having set it up. Another slight detour is just to mention the Orient programme, which some of you may have heard of. There was a press release issued by the European Commission about this only a couple of weeks ago. Oriental Research Infrastructure to European Networks. Nice acronym. What it really means is it's connecting the Chinese networks to Europe with some additional capacity. Whilst TNC2 is for the region, the whole region, including China, this is specifically for China, Europe, and reflects the fact there is so much demand from users for connectivity to China that we had to put in something extra for that. And that's being funded jointly by the Chinese government and Europe, both the Commission and NRENS, a number of partners in this programme. And this is shortly going to provide connectivity. We haven't done so yet. What we're planning to do is to upgrade one of the TNC2 link, the northern link, the one that goes the Trans-Siberian link, as I mentioned earlier. We'll be upgrading that from its current 622 to 2.5 gigs to provide the additional connectivity for China. Quite a lot of applications already identified, as mentioned there, and reflects the scientific interest of Europe and China in working much more closely together. So, drawing things to a bit of a conclusion, it's quite interesting to sort of reflect on to what extent have the work that we've done, how has that helped NRENs in their national field to develop? And I think it's helped. It does seem to have helped a great deal. Clearly, I mean, the most obvious thing it does is it obviously provides the international connections, so that the networks no longer need to work simply with others in their own country, but can work equally easily from a technical point of view with those in other countries. So it creates the environment for collaboration to happen. We've also seen with these regional projects that that the partners within the programs, as well as between the programs, can share best practice ideas. And we've also noticed a certain amount of friendly rivalry, I think, between the NRENs, spurring each other on to improve, which I think actually is for the greater good in many ways. I think that's quite a healthy approach. It's also helped to create some external visibility of how the NRENs are performing, and it's certainly helped several of our partners to develop their internal business cases. The fact that the European programs are there has helped them justify upgrading their national networks. And I can give you two examples of that. Look at Morocco, first of all. When Morocco was first connected to UMed Connect in 2004, it had a backbone network in Morocco which was based on E1 circuits, so 2 megabit backbone network. And that was actually quite good. There were several of our partners had networks were considerably smaller than that. But it was a 2 meg network, basically. But during the time of UMed Connect, Marwan has been successful in creating firstly a business case, getting government funding, and going through what was actually quite a hard process for them, I think, to get a larger network. They now have a network which is based on a 34 meg backbone and connecting rather more of their sites than they were before. And I think although it's not the only factor, I mean, clearly the UMed Connect connection and focus from Europe on what was going on was a helpful factor in helping justify that program. Another example is Vietnam. 5 years ago, there was a tiny network in Vietnam which basically fell into disrepair and collapsed and disappeared. Thanks to TNC2006's influence, it's being resuscitated. There's a whole new lease of life in Vietnam for networking, and they have a new network being built now called VinRN, with a rather fancy logo, which will again link initially the universities around Hanoi in the north of the country, and then progressively over the next 12 months or so roll out to the rest of Vietnam. I could give you similar stories for several of the other countries as well, but I know the coffee break waits. Final thing I think I'll just say is make a few general comments about the programme. All the programmes we've done have felt quite hard, and I guess that by definition is really it's almost what it has to be, because if they were easy, they would have happened. They would have already have happened, and they're hard because the markets are emerging. The phone companies are either monopolies or fairly non-competitive, and the partners haven't had a history previously of working together. So there's been a lot of things you've had to sort of push uphill. But I think, nevertheless, I mean, these projects are quite rewarding because of the fact that there are some evident successes from them. Certainly within Dante, we've followed a fairly generic model of how we've gone about these programs, learning as we go, as it were. But I mean, what we have learned is that local requirements and cultures and needs are all different, and therefore it's been necessary to be pretty flexible as we've gone on, and not be too sort of slavish about the approach we've used. Sad to say, I mean, I think despite all we've done, the digital divide remains huge. I mean, it still exists in Europe to an extent, as we know. It most certainly still exists in the emerging regions that we've been focusing on here. If I take the Mediterranean as an example, there are no new cable systems in the Mediterranean today. Most of the plans for deregulation and in a greater competition that we hoped were going to take place have not taken place, and it's still a pretty difficult area, and that applies to the other emerging regions as well. So there's still a whole lot more to do. We've learned that it's very important to focus on not just on getting the infrastructure in place, though that is probably one of the first things you have to do, but also then to focus on getting it used and making sure that it meets users' needs. It's kind of obvious stuff, but I mean, it requires quite a lot of effort as you to actually sort of make that, to turn that sort of motherhood statement into some sort of reality. And then the final comments are, again, obvious ones, but actually take an awful lot of time, and that is about making sure the projects are there for the long term and not just for the initial period of commission funding, and the necessity of maintaining external funding. All three projects that we've talked about, UMed Connect, Alice and Tain 2, all of them at the moment are scheduled to finish next year, in 2007, and none of them has a committed plan for longer term sustainability yet. So a lot of our job now over the next few months is to actually sort of complete those plans. There's a lot of work has already happened in all three programs, but I'm afraid it's going to have to continue for some time before we've actually achieved those goals. Thank you very much for listening. If there's any questions, I'll hand over to my chair to advise me on how long we've got.
Okay, thank you very much, David. We've actually got a few minutes for questions, so if we've got any questions, can you indicate? There's one. Can you wait for the microphone as well, please? Especially with helicopters or something flying over.
Hello? No, sorry. I'm Simon Line and I work for Switch, which is the NRN in a small landlocked country in the middle of Europe. All the presentations were very interesting. I'm a network engineer, so I always try to find the connectivity that follows from all these nice-looking subway maps and links. And I have sort of two technical thoughts that stuck in my mind. One is you all talk about megabits per second, okay, all the time. Connectivity is equal to this many megabits per second. So these states had this little connectivity then, and now they have this much connectivity. Having worked a lot in debugging people's performance issues, I think this is not a very good indicator of connectivity. I would really like to see, and I don't have a solution for this, to see like more expressive indications on what does it mean connectivity. I think for a researcher, which are ultimate users and customers, if you will, is probably more something like how many other researchers can I reach through the network enabling these types of applications. And the people who are interested in megabits per second, ultimately they are only these land speed record folks. So most people use the network very productively for research, and sometimes they transfer big files, and most of the time they're interested in these files arriving in bounded time, but most of the time they're not limited by like bits per second. They're limited by delay, more than that. I mean that's certainly not true for all regions, and in some of the regions we heard, I'm 100% sure that they are really limited by these slow links, low capacity links. But I think we should try to be more expressive and try to come up with metrics that say, well, I can now interact with these web applications on the interesting server in another part of the world this much faster. The bits per second don't cut it in many situations. And the other remark I have is that the world doesn't have sides. You said, well, now we reach Eastern Asia directly rather than through the backside of the world. And well, I noticed that when we used to reach countries like Japan, I think we still reach them through the US and China too. And then we had this new, what you call a direct connection through the CMIWI cable. And when it came in operation, I was excited, and I thought, well, now let's measure these ping times. And they were exactly the same, like from 294 milliseconds to 292 milliseconds. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, well, there must be a routing problem. And then I found this map, and it actually, on the CMIWI side, actually had the distances between all the landing stations, and I took out a calculator, and the cable is over 20,000 kilometers long from Western Europe to China, because it goes all the way around almost to the equator. And, 20,000 kilometers is like the distance from Europe to New Zealand or something. So I was surprised. And you really should take these distances into account. Direct connections are fine. But, for example, I shudder at the thought that I should now reach, in the near future, I should now reach Mexico from Europe through Brazil, because that is sort of the direct connection between Europe, Madrid, Sao Paulo, and the northwestern part of Mexico. I sometimes use this great circle mapper, and the current route through England, or France, England, America is like 11,000 kilometers. And the new direct route will be 18,000 kilometers. So the quality of service will decrease if we do this routing. So I don't know what to do with it, but please talk to the network routing expert people too when you put these networks into service, so that the people understand these performance implications, which can be negative. I mean, I don't want to minimize all the good things this does, but please keep this in mind. So sometimes politics and performance can conflict here.
Okay, so I'll just make a couple of brief responses. Firstly, in terms of the connectivity measured in megabits, I understand your point that it would be good to get some additional measures to kind of to better inform researchers. But I do think the point remains that in all of the emerging markets we've been talking about, where the total connectivity for the whole country, not just for the researcher, is measured in tens or low hundreds of megabits, that is actually a pretty good shorthand measure, and it is a genuine limitation on the applications that can be performed by users. Secondly, in terms of the round trip times, certainly I can assure you that certainly for Europe to Southeast Asia, CME 3 has dramatically reduced the latency. Not to China, because that's thousands of miles further north again, and you will use the northern route for that. But certainly, I mean, clearly this is something we're very interested in, and the Asians are very interested in, and we are seeing dramatic differences. I mean, like reductions of 2 to 3 times, so down to that's a third of what the timings were. Obviously, some routes will be a bit strange, but nevertheless, the general effect has been to make big reductions.
Okay. There's one last question, which is Alex Reid from Australia.
Thank you. Yes, just to reinforce, I live in Perth, Western Australia, and our latency times have dramatically improved to Asia. Really? That was not my question. It was about, you said that, rightly, that we should focus on the applications. How have you gone about discovering what are the applications in these countries so that you can directly address them and make sure that people are fired up to actually make use of the networks once they're in place?
The main way, quite simply from our point of view, is to use our partners as the main means of identifying the applications and working with the users. After all, the users in each country are their users. And so one of the jobs that we've tasked our users with doing, ARNet in your case, is to actually help identify the applications that are either there today and would like to internationalize, or would like to improve or extend what they're doing internationally, or potential applications. And what we've been trying to do is to bring them together. So it's very much, I think, working with the partners. In some cases we've done it directly ourselves. For example, there's some in the Asian case, for example, there are, well, actually with all the programs, there are some other Commission-sponsored application programs, and we've tried to migrate those programs onto the new infrastructure where we can. But generally, it's working with the partners. Is how we've done it.
Okay. Can I say thank you once again to all three speakers? I think they've done an excellent job this morning. Thank you. Coffee, granite, ice cream, whatever should be being served in the normal location. And can I remind you to get back to the final session at 11 o'clock? Thank you very much.